Yonah Weiss, welcome to Jewish Money Matters. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
It is the pleasure is mine, or at least equally, because great to be on the show. I love the show. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And thank you to my husband for the introduction. He was the one who, you were a guest on his show, the Gate of Trust podcast. He did a great job. And then we were in conversation. I was like, oh, yes. He's like, yes, you must have Yonah Weiss on the show. You're the cost segregation king. You're the host of Weiss Advice. So I'm really looking forward to get some Weiss advice for my audience from you.
I'll do my best.
Let's start with cost segregation. We're not going to get too deep into it, but it's such a niche area of real estate. Why don't you give us some highlights? What is cost segregation?
You're absolutely right. It is a niche area within real estate. So real estate in general is for investment properties. We're not talking about your personal residence. There's a special tax deduction that anyone who owns a rental property or commercial or business property gets to take. That's called depreciation. And so you've probably heard of this, depreciation. What cost segregation is just an advanced form of that depreciation deduction. So it actually allows you to take larger amounts of those depreciation deductions in the earlier years of ownership. So it's a very, as it was, like you said, a niche kind of service for commercial real estate owners, but actually is one of the key factors for, I'd say, tens of thousands of real estate owners, investors, to help to reduce their income tax liability to essentially zero. You have people who are building wealth through real estate and at the same time doing it in a tax-free environment.
And you get to help people with that. You became the king of cost segregation. Now, we have to start with from the beginning, because your career journey is not the typical career journey. In fact, I understand you weren't really a real estate expert. You weren't a cost segregation expert. You weren't even in the working world or in the business world for about 12 years of your adult life. So take us to the very beginning. What were those 12 years of your adult married life like? What changed? What led you to the career in now? And the reason I'm asking is because I know in your story, we see the hand of God so evident, and we also see the application of your trust, your bitachon. So there's so many things that we can highlight throughout the journey. So why don't you take us there?
I appreciate that. And it's so true. And everyone has this. And really, I think the most important thing is really to open your eyes to that hand of God that you're talking about and seeing the process. And as you mentioned, I actually spent the good part of my adult life teaching and learning. I was in kollel and yeshiva for many years. In fact, 14 years before I actually ventured off into what they call, the business world or whatever you want to call it. And it wasn't because I really had interest in anything besides for learning and, just being a part of the community that I was in. I did start a nonprofit during that time. I did, teach, and I had, some sort of, I guess you wouldn't call it like a business world, but I was, making ends meet to a certain extent, although simultaneously had a large amount of debt that really held me back from leaving kind of my comfort zone of doing anything different. So, but again, I didn't grow up with any sort of financial education. Any sort of, we were always taught, I got my first job when I was like 14, part-time job, because we were taught that if you wanted, money to spend, you'd have to earn it. You'd have to work for it. So I did have that work ethic, but I was never kind of taught, well, how to use that and how to spend it or how to save it or invest or anything like that. So it was really only until I'm like about 14, 15 years into my marriage, around 35, or even a little more, where I was faced with some decisions in my life that I need to make. There were, unfortunately, some situations came up in our personal life that made it difficult, that I could really know why, or at least I saw the hand of God telling me, you need to make some changes. You need to do something different because the current situation, you can't keep it up. And I was fortunate enough to have some mentors and to have people in my life that, rabbis and counselors, people that I could turn to for advice. And the common theme was, you should really, seek out some way of earning, a much greater parnasa, a greater amount of living, so that you can be there for your family and be there to make sure that, a situation like had occurred to me wouldn't occur again.
So are you suggesting that there was some sort of financial challenge that was kind of a wake up call and you said, oh, maybe God is trying to tell me something?
It was actually a financial challenge. It was a medical challenge,
Uh-huh.
but that basically put me out of the ability to really focus on anything else. So I couldn't even work. I couldn't spend, I couldn't do what I was doing before, and I couldn't be in the yeshiva or the kollel where I was receiving a stipend. And it was just something that I realized, okay, I don't have any support. I didn't have any
Hmm.
financial support from family at the time. So it was really like, okay, however much we're making, this is it. But now when those avenues are cut off and you're faced with a decision, and because of the expenses that incurred through that medical challenge that I had, I put myself in tens of thousands of dollars of more debt than I
Right.
had, and I knew that I needed to do something differently
Right.
than I was currently doing to get out of that.
Right, right. And you mentioned it because you mentioned that the debt held you back. You just said do something different. And sometimes we have to do something that's radically different, right? And it sounds like that's what it was for you.
Well, I had no idea what that was. And that's the funny thing. Like, I knew that I had to do something different. So I basically just opened myself up to opportunities. And this is really where I saw the hand of God more than anything else, the Hashgacha Pratit that we
Hmm.
talked about, where I put myself out there. And oftentimes that's what you need to do. You just need to tell friends, acquaintances, family members. It may be difficult, but say, hey, listen, uh, I'm looking for an opportunity. I'm looking maybe for a new job, a new career, a new path. I knew I didn't want to have any sort of formal education, any more of that. I was already in
Right.
my mid 30s. To my at least to my perspective, I'd spent, a decade and a half learning full time.
Hmm.
And I really wasn't interested, even though I did have a college degree, I wasn't interested in going back to that of any kind. So I knew my options were limited, and so I just focused and honed in on, well, what are my options within that area where I can,
Hmm.
number one, have a career or have something that I can do that does not require more formal education. And at the same time, maybe has, unlimited potential for income. And
Hmm.
real estate kept coming up from all the people that I spoke to. I spoke to friends, and there's like, oh, this person was doing fix and flips, and this person was in commercial mortgages and doing things. And I was just like, I don't know the first thing about real estate, don't know the first thing about commercial real estate, but I'm open, and I'm open to
Hmm.
learning.
Hmm. So two things you just came up on what you were saying. One, the vulnerability to be able to say, listen, I'm out there. I'm looking for an opportunity. What do you know that you think it could be a good fit for me? Like those conversations can be uncomfortable and people can feel really vulnerable, but like you said, it's important to do so. And then the idea, well, I don't know what this is, but I'm open to learning it.
100%. And the first thing you said there is so true. Just to reiterate, it was extremely uncomfortable, and
Hmm.
especially from someone like me. Like, my whole life and my whole existence was in Torah and in
Torah.
learning. And
Right.
I was a rabbi for all intents and purposes, and I was spent all my days and nights,
Hmm.
learning and teaching. And to do something different was, I felt like, oh, would people look down on me? Would my
Hmm.
community, look to me like, well, why are you doing this different? But I knew that I had to make some changes, and I knew that there wasn't a contradiction. I think oftentimes we feel, especially in the Torah world, we feel like there's a contradiction sometimes between working and learning, or
Mm.
I want to do both, or I want to do some. And the truth of the matter is, we are meant to be involved in this physical world in so many ways, and to use it and to elevate it and to make it holy, and not to
Mhm.
just, sure, it's amazing to, to sit and learn all day and to teach, and that's necessary. But at the same time, there are, things that we can do in the business world that can not be done if you're sitting in the base medrash all day. I mean,
Mhm.
Choshen Mishpat,
Mhm.
for example, one whole section of the Shulchan Aruch is dedicated to interpersonal business
Right.
transactions. and
Right.
and I was learning that at the time. I was like, okay, well, it's all kind of hypothetical to me.
Mhm.
We learn on Chaim, we learn the things that are our daily things, and it's very practical. People like to learn it, right? You learn about the laws of learning and davening and tefillah and brachot. These are things that happen every single day. But when, in the holidays, those are really important to learn. But when it comes to Choshen Mishpat, it comes to things that are business dealings, most people who, even in the business world, aren't very well versed and familiar with that. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
it was the opposite. I was learning and I was like, well, this is very hypothetical and not practical to me. And then when I had the opportunity to, to take it on basically head on, it was totally eye-opening because it gave
I
me an
love that.
opportunity to serve God in a
Yeah.
way I'd never had before.
Right. I Before we get on to how the story moved on and the first opportunity, the first few opportunities presented themselves, what were those conversations with your wife like? Did she struggle with the uncertainty? Was she okay with, having some of the debt up until that bigger financial crisis? I'm saying, that was like a big
Right.
wake up call. Okay, we have to do something. I get that part. But throughout the years where you're learning, she's presumably, I would think, contributing somehow to the household expenses. What were those conversations like? Did the financial worries ever come up?
They did. They did, certainly. We didn't discuss finances that much, to
Mm-hmm.
be honest. It was just something I didn't really put too much thought and effort
Right.
into. And yeah, we had expenses. She did work in various forms throughout our married life at that point. Never anything full time, but she was definitely contributing and was very supportive of whatever I was
Mm-hmm.
doing. We live an
Mm-hmm.
extremely frugal lifestyle and have a mindset where we're not really interested in luxuries, neither of us.
Right.
And so
Right.
we never had major expenses at any point. Obviously, food and education and housing, all the
Those are
basics.
big in the Jewish world.
Those are big. This can be big, but we were never caught up in kind of
Yes.
keeping up with the Joneses or anything like that. So we didn't have like extreme ideas for buying things or having luxuries and things like that. So it was more manageable.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to something that you mentioned, because we were just having we were having this conversation about, you could feel like, your whole world was Torah and it can feel uncomfortable. It's almost like we can maybe feel like, oh, is this a failure on my part? But I think the way you explained it, it's like, no, this is actually exactly what God wants me to be doing. He's just redirecting me. There's a time in my life where I needed to be focused in this way, but Hashem gave me this challenge to redirect me on a higher level of serving God. And you mentioned something beautiful, which is you had mentors. What were those conversations like? How did they push you to manage the discomfort, to rethink what could be think as a God forbid a failure? What was that like?
It's such an important point. And it is a little hard to kind of go back and to think about what those conversations were, all these years ago. But it was, to me, like you said, there was that kind of feeling of failure, or feeling of, maybe I'm doing something wrong, or maybe I should continue to struggle in what I was doing until now. And having those conversations with my rabbi, with people that I trusted, who could give me a little bit more objectivity.
So important.
One conversation in particular strikes me, with a gentleman who I was close with, who was, in the business world. He is, someone who had been, in the financial industry, mutual funds, I believe was his main occupation for 30, 40 years. And someone had been, very well-versed, and someone who I considered, financially successful. And at the same time was a very committed Jew and very, person who I looked up to in that regard. And we had a conversation, and he basically told me that, I didn't have a choice. Like I had to work things out, and I had to figure something out. But, to be open to opportunities and just try out a few different things. That's basically what he told me. He said, think about what interests you or what opportunities are out there, and try out a bunch of different things. You don't have to commit to anything. You don't have to say, oh, this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. Just see what opportunities are there, try it out for a little while. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. Go back to the drawing board and see what else.
Nice.
And that to me was very eye-opening, because I thought like, oh, I had to like pick a job, pick a career path, and like that was it. And I literally I tried out a bunch of different things at that point. And I went back to him a few times, and he was actually very, continuously very supportive of that.
I like that advice, because it really relieves the pressure. Like, we don't have to commit for life to anything. And so let's go to the opportunities. So how did you end up in cost segregation?
Yeah, right.
Now you're
Yeah,
testing things out. How did you end up in cost segregation?
it was a couple years. So the first thing I did, a few different things, and I'll skip over some of those random things that I was interested in doing. But one conversation I had early on with a good friend of mine, which again was this incredible hashgacha, was this, meeting a friend in the parking lot and saying, "Hey, by the way, if you know of anything, I'm open to some opportunity." And he said, "Well, it just happens to be," and there's no such thing as happenstance.
Right.
He says that it just happens to be that, he was a commercial mortgage broker, this guy, and he had actually had a lot of experience in real estate. He owned some rental properties. He had done property management. It was in the family. He'd done a lot of things. And he was leaving the current firm he was working with, who had been with for a few years, and was going to work for his uncle, who owned like a small boutique financing company. And at that time, he was like, "Hey, I'm starting this new thing. Why don't you come and just learn from me? Just come and hang out with me in my office every day, and I'll teach you everything there is to know about commercial mortgages, about commercial real estate." And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure." And I even remember that first conversation where he was literally like describing to me, certain things that to me now are like, "Oh yeah, I take for granted, like what's a cap rate, like what's, loan to value, like LTV, all these acronyms throwing at me." And I was like, "What's a commercial mortgage? What does that mean? That you can buy a property and you don't actually have to put all your money down, like understood for, and all these things, and refinancing." And I was like, "Okay, this is fascinating to me. Like, why not learn something?" And I literally
Was
sat
this
with
for
him.
pay, or you were just learning? They weren't paying
So
you.
it wasn't a paid, it was basically like an internship, I would look at it more
Right.
like, but it was paid in that if we ended up doing some deals. So we ended up, brokering mortgages. And so anything that I participated in, I did receive a commission.
Nice. Very nice. Okay.
It did take a while until, we got anything off the ground, but that was, good to know. And so for me, it was literally about 8, 9 months or so of just sitting with him in his office and learning the ropes. And so that was the first opportunity. Fast forward about, I'd say, a year and a half to 2 years after that first conversation with him, he had moved on. He had actually moved, and we weren't doing the same thing anymore for a while. And I was again looking for a new opportunity. I had done some residential brokerage for a little while, also just dabbling my feet in that. And then I'd reached back out to this friend, the same friend, originally, and said, "Hey, if you know of anything, let me know." And he told me he had just run into someone else, again, random. We would call it, if we don't see it's hashgacha pratis, if we don't see that it's really God's hand making things happen, it would just be a coincidence, right? I don't believe in that word coincidence, but people would see, "Oh, it's a coincidence." He happened to bump into a friend that he hadn't seen in a long time in a town he had never been to before. And they had both happened to be there. And he's like, "Hey, why don't you, this guy got a job working for this company, Madison. Madison's a huge commercial real estate company in the States, based in Lakewood." He's like, "This guy just got a job. Why don't you reach out to him? Maybe they're hiring more people." Happened to be, I had a conversation with this mutual friend, and it was a perfect fit. I didn't know anything about cost segregation at the time, but they were looking for someone in the sales and the business development, and it was something I could learn. And again, back to that idea where I was open to opportunity. I was open to be uncomfortable for a little while you're learning something new. And again, also have that mindset. Well, if this doesn't work out, that's okay too.
Unbelievable. Now, throughout this journey, did you have an obsession with the Gate of Trust like my husband does? Were you a student of the Gate of Trust at the Shara Bitachon?
No, not entirely. I mean, I had read it years and years ago, but and so the principles were definitely fresh to me all the time, because there's things that I live by, but it wasn't something that I had regularly learned. It wasn't until about a year ago, where this new book was published, or less than a year, like 8, 9 months ago, when this new version was published, that I reread it for the first time in probably 10, 15 years. But yeah, the principles were definitely there. The principles that I live by, of bitachon were definitely there.
Amazing. So now you start with Madison, and they are your current employer. This is right. This is where you've built the kingship of cost segregation.
It's been a great ride. Yeah.
So I think it's important for us to highlight now this part of your professional life, because you work for Madison Specs, but everything that you do, Yonah, suggests entrepreneurship. And I want to talk about that combination of being employed and being totally entrepreneurial at the same time. You've created a personal brand which benefits yourself, but at the same time, you've added a tremendous amount of value to your employer. Now, this is rare. Maybe it's not as rare, but it's something that everybody should be emulating. I don't care who your employer is. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, it is less common. I like to call it like intrapreneurship.
Right.
So it's something where you can actually be working for someone else, not necessarily own a company, but work with that entrepreneurial mindset and do things in a way that are out of the box, do things that are different. Creating a personal brand, I think, is so important. And I only really learned this almost by accident, but it has been extremely beneficial. And through this, yeah, correct, I'm working for a company. I don't own the company, which a lot of people actually think I do, which is, it's a great compliment.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, because of that branding, because, and that's something that can be done through social media, just through, being aligned with whatever it is that you are doing. Just make that, part of who you are, how you present yourself, so that people remember and connect you with whatever that your name and your persona with whatever that thing is. And so, yeah, I've been very consistent with building that over time. And I've been given, thankfully, a lot of flexibility to basically do whatever I want. And so I can spend most of my days, on social media and on podcasts and traveling, to events and having my own podcast and investing in real estate on my own. And it's all because I have, my focus is twofold. Is one, how can I add the most value to my employer, to the company I'm working for? And simultaneously, how can I add the most value to my clients and to the people who are essentially, bringing in the income to this company? And so when the focus is kind of twofold, and again, not so much thinking about myself, I think my focus is outward in those two directions, kind of simultaneously. And then it all comes back, it all comes, good. And so it's not, I wouldn't say this is something that can be done at every company, right? People, and I did have a lot of pushback at the beginning, for the first year or two, that I was really focused on my style of business development. I had pushback because it is less traditional. It is something that we do things this way. And I don't see, why do you spend so much time on LinkedIn or on social media? And then as they saw the results, it was like, okay, do whatever you want, you're good. But at the same time, other people may try it and may not be as successful. So I do want to put it out there. It is something that is, can be done, should be done. But just, again, be open to pushback and be open to, maybe it not working out.
And you said you fell into this almost by accident. What did you mean by that?
I knew nothing about, social media or marketing or anything really, for that matter. I mean, I had some background in sales through the real estate that I had done before and the commercial mortgage things and stuff like that. But, social media, I had no idea. So I had a LinkedIn account for 10, 15 years, because that's what everyone did.
That's what we all did, right?
Right. You connected with your people that you went to college with, or people that you knew from wherever. And, but one day when I was actually searching for someone's name and someone's company, to reach out to them, and a reasonable salesperson is trying their best to reach out in whatever form, whatever medium they can, whether it's through phone, through email, to try to contact a potential client. And so I was doing that traditional method, and I would Google someone's name just to make sure this is the right person, right, company. And invariably, LinkedIn would come up at the top of that Google search every single time, literally like the first or second result. And so I would invariably log into LinkedIn and oh, this is interesting. Yes, this is the person, same company, same town, right, city that they're located in. So I would verify that. And then on the news feed, this was about 5-6 years ago, LinkedIn, I learned, in retrospect, that it had been purchased by Microsoft and was becoming more of a social media platform, as opposed to just a resume and, headhunting or whatever you want to call it, recruiting platform. And I kept seeing stuff come up on the home feed as opposed to just articles that used to be shared all the time, just these articles that were not
Right.
interesting. I started people having like videos and someone like sharing some inspirational or motivational advice. And I was in sales. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And I saw that. And I was like, well, if this person can do that, maybe I can try that also. And I literally just tried. Oh, maybe I can start doing this. And I came across Gary Vaynerchuk at that time, like really interesting, talking about marketing and talking about social media marketing. And I was like blown away by a lot of this. And that's why, like I said, almost by accident, because I was, using Google to find contact names for people, and then just going back to LinkedIn because that's where I could verify it. And then it was more about finding people than it was the social media and the marketing aspect of it. But that I fell into and just tried it out and saw some results and just kept doubling down until, it really snowballed until where it is today.
That's unbelievable. So you said to yourself, well, why don't I try this out to let people know that what it is that I do?
Sure. Yeah. And, and then I found out pretty quickly that, kind of self-promotion that a lot of people use social media for is probably the least effective way of using social media. But so I had to become creative in, and learning copywriting and learning marketing strategies and learning all these different methods. But I picked it up little by little, just kind of by viewing what other people were doing and copying, and mimicking in my own style what others who were successfully doing it.
I'm glad you're saying this because I want to go back to something you said earlier about I didn't want to go and get another degree. And so often we think we have to, and in my head, I'm like, you have a pretty sharp mind. You've been learning Torah for 14 years. I'm pretty sure you don't need another degree, right? And I think you've just proven that point, right? Like you're at the same time that you're learning a new industry, a new, very specific segment of that industry and the tax law and all those things. You're also teaching yourself how to market nowadays on LinkedIn, how to write, how to communicate, and then podcasting, which is a whole different, so thank God you didn't go for the extra degree. You've proven that you could do it all on your own.
It's all from Hashem. It's really true. It's not on my own at all. It's all from above and through that help. But you're absolutely right. There's so much to learn. So I do have a, passion for learning, and I do have, I'd say, when people ask me like, what's your superpower? If you can say what that is, I think one of those things is being able to learn and pick up new things and integrate them and be able to teach them. And I think that's why podcasting is so much fun for me, because it's, essentially just like teaching. And so all of these things, it really did come, I wouldn't say naturally, but came easier to me than maybe for some other people might. That's what I think. But again, you don't need to have a formal degree. You don't need to sit in a classroom. I think that's what your point, Yael, that you don't need to sit in a classroom and get a degree to learn things. I mean, it's all there. You just go to YouTube or you go to wherever and you can pick it up.
You just have to be brave to try it out and embarrass yourself a little bit and just keep doing it.
That's right. Iterate and just keep doing better.
Iterate. So Yonah, at what time does the financial situation start turning? When do you start seeing the wheels turn?
It did, honestly, it took a couple of years to really see those things. I mean, I really had a lot of that debt still carrying on my shoulders for a while. But I saw a lot of potential in what I was doing. And I saw that if I did continue down this path, it would change. And I really had that bitachon to know that, this was the right path. This is where I'm being called right now to do. And I'm finding success in doing this. And I'm getting great, positive feedback from others in doing this. And at the same time, I was helping people. And that's really what my passion was. So like, I'm, helping, doing this service called Segregation. But the way I viewed it was I'm helping people save taxes. And so I found that literally all day long, I was just, giving and helping other people. And so that's really part of my nature. And it really helped me to continue down that path, even though I didn't see that I was necessarily getting, the monetary or the financial compensation that I thought I would be getting. But I did see the potential. So it did take a couple of years, but thank God it has turned around. I've been able to, to learn more about investing along the way. And as I mentioned, invest in real estate, a lot since
Mhm.
since I've been doing this. And the networking, I think, is probably the biggest thing, because
Mm.
the people that I've met, because the position that I'm in, being, the biggest company in the country doing this cost segregation thing, I'm rubbing shoulders with some of the most successful real estate entrepreneurs and businesses in the country, in
Mhm.
all asset classes, all over the place. And because the way they view me is that I'm helping them save, in many cases, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in taxes every year, they happen to like me for some
Mm.
reason. And I don't know why
I
that
wonder
is.
why. That
So
is just so
it's been
awesome.
great. The networking and being able to meet and become close with these people has just been amazing.
It's such a bracha. It's such a blessing that you ended up in a place that you liked what you're doing, that you were feeling the satisfaction. And like you said, even though maybe the money wasn't huge at the beginning, but you still felt good about what you were doing. And that's such a big,
That's really
important piece of
important.
this.
Yeah, that's huge. That is really important.
I want to talk about the challenge of, we could call it the challenge of wealth or the challenge of financial success. In many ways, it's kind of twofold. For so many, when our financial situation changes for the good, two things could happen. On a spiritual level, it could be a challenge to one's humility on some level, right? That's the real test of wealth, and how we relate to God and as the source of the blessing. And on another level, on a very practical level, there's a challenge of, a lifestyle creep that sometimes leads people to the same or even more degree of stress and worry than maybe perhaps they had before. As your financial situation began to change, Yonah, how did you and presumably your wife with you face maybe we could call it, the challenge of financial success? How did you make financial decisions and choices to stay tempered in these two areas?
These are two of like the most difficult challenges that I think
Right.
everyone deals with. And you're absolutely right. I'd say part of the way that we dealt with this and continue to deal with this as time goes on is, number one, having a lot of those foundations of bitachon and having the right mindset from the beginning. And so
Mm-hmm.
spending many years learning and being connected to God through through real ways, not just going through action. And a lot of people out there doing things, not speaking down on anyone, but having those real foundations of what am I here in this world for? Like, what are
Right.
we here for? And knowing that making money is a blessing. It really
Mm-hmm.
is. And knowing
Mm-hmm.
where the source of that money is and what it's to be used for, that's all a blessing. So to me, having those foundations were key. Now the creep that I talked about, we talked about earlier, that we were very, very frugal and continue to be so. And so our lifestyle creep has not really increased very
Mm-hmm.
much, almost at all. And I think that's really important as well, because knowing that just because you're making more money does not mean you need to spend more money, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, and this is a quote that I came across, I don't know who said it, it's anonymous. I've used this over and over again, and this is something I feel extremely powerful about. And this will kind of segue into what I want to talk about on this subject, is that when your income increases, and again, this is an anonymous quote, but I'll take credit for it going forward. But when your income increases, don't increase your standard of living, rather increase your standard of giving.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing that, this has really been my perspective, that all the money I'm making it's from Hashem. It's all from
Mm-hmm.
Hashem. So therefore, if I'm making more of it, if Hashem has decided to give me a lot more, that means that I should be giving a lot more to tzedakah. I should be giving a lot more to charity. It's not for
Mm-hmm.
me to spend. It's all from, I'm just a steward of that money. And so for me, that's been a huge foundation from the very, very beginning, whatever
Mm-hmm.
I could do, and to study and to learn about the laws of tzedakah, of charity,
Mm-hmm.
and to learn more about how I can go about doing it in more ways, and how to develop and establish different kind of channels of charity and charitable giving and things like that, and help out more people. And so when you're faced with that, oftentimes like, oh, I made this X amount of, okay, I'll give my 10% to Meiser, which is great, which is awesome, and everyone should be doing that. And if you're
Right.
not, that, I know that's a challenge. That can be a very big challenge. And I heard from Iris Lodowitz, who's extremely successful commercial real estate mogul, really. He told me that, he taught all of his employees from day one to give Meiser, right? If you make $1, give 10 cents, right? Don't say, oh, when I make, my first $10,000 paycheck, then I'm going to give. No, if you start now, you'll train yourself and you'll be comfortable with just giving that. So again, the Meiser, that's very, if you're trained to do that, that can come off easy. And so when you start making more, it's like, okay, great, now I can give more. The challenge becomes when you're dealing with that difference, right? When you're like, okay, my standard of living, right? We can, our budget or whatever it is X amount a month. And then anything beyond that, okay, I can save, I can invest, I can do that. But the charity, increasing that charity should be at least on the same amount as the other things of saving and investing, because again, where's that coming from, right?
Wow. I love that. And I don't think anybody had put it so clearly on the show. And I so appreciate that, right? Because yes, the minimum is 10%, but can you challenge yourself to, just as you're going to take all the other prudent financial steps and now you've gotten out of debt, presumably, and you have enough cash flow to, support your family and not be in debt and to save and to invest. That's all great. But can you increase your giving proportionally to that? That is amazing. And that's a level to aspire to.
It is. And it's something that, again, I've really felt this way from the very beginning. So it's been easier for me just to keep that in mind the whole time. And it is challenging, believe me, when you receive a huge, when you're receiving, 6 figures or 7 figures or whatever like that, that can be extremely challenging. Like, well, am I really going to give like 6 figures or 7 figures to, like, why would I never did that before? Why would I do that now? But like, no, when it's coming to you and you know where it's coming from and you see yourself as just a steward, well, guess what? God's going to give you a lot more because he sees that you're doing well with that. So I truly, heartily believe that.
Amazing. And I guess related to this, I mean, this is so inspiring, but let's give people a little bit, even more inspiration, because a lot of people struggle financially. They get frustrated, they get despondent, they get impatient with God. There are hardships. You know it, 100%. You experienced it.
Absolutely.
They feel like they're not making enough. They work very hard. What else can we tell them, other than obviously the beauty of what you shared with Meiser? Any other words of advice to the person who's stuck there and trying to find their way and stay afloat financially?
It is very difficult, and I've been there, and I know what it's like, and it is a real struggle to not make ends meet, and to be in debt, and to work hard, and to struggle, and really not know where you're gonna. I mean, I had no idea where I'm gonna buy bread.
Right, the uncertainty, food. Right,
like total uncertainty. Like I can't even. I have to borrow money in order to like buy groceries. Like, yeah, my credit cards were totally maxed out, and everything else. But even that point, I mean, it's embarrassing and it's hard. But to know that everything that happens, there's a reason for it. And oftentimes the struggles that we go through are exactly what we need to get us to a different point, where, to get us to a point where we can actually, succeed, and we can, take those lessons because we've struggled, because we've gone through that. At a later point, we can know how it feels, and we can know how to do things properly. And another really important factor there is, like I said, yeah, everything happens for a reason, but it's all for the good. And oftentimes we think, oh, why did this happen to me? Or why am I struggling like this? When in fact, it could be actually a huge blessing in disguise, right? Thank God, yes, people, if you're healthy, you have a healthy family, like, those are things we often take for granted.
Right.
And oftentimes we maybe struggle, and this is brought in many, many svarim, like sometimes we'll struggle financially so that we don't have to suffer, physical or health, harm. And so that's a kapara. That really is. That's something that we need to open our eyes and say, thank you, Hashem, for putting me in this situation. And guess what? When you thank Hashem, right? That's what we say in Hallel. We say, like, thank you that I'm suffering. Why are we thanking Hashem that we're suffering? We thank Hashem for our suffering because we know that will get us through. Hashem says, oh, you're thanking me for while you're suffering. How much more so will you thank me if I give you, goodness? And so that's a real lesson. And as you said before, the struggle of wealth sometimes, that people who are in that situation where they have everything going for them seemingly, and they're taking things for granted. Well, guess what? Those things can be taken away also at any time. And so having that right thoughtfulness and gratefulness and gratitude on a daily basis, oftentimes Hashem just wants to hear from us. Hashem wants to hear our cries and hear what we're going through. And that may be the only reason.
So it's what I'm hearing is, if we can step out of the cynicism and the despondency and get into a place of gratitude and focus on so much that we have to be grateful for, that in and of itself can really open the pipeline to abundant blessings on all other areas in your life.
Absolutely.
So important. So beautiful. Yonah, any wins that you want to highlight? We did a little bit of the, kind of the failures, kind of like the challenges, but sometimes we have financial wins and they don't seem like humongous, but they sound small, but for me, they're like quantum leap kind of thing, like anything that comes to mind that you're like, you know what, this is a win. And maybe I haven't even celebrated it so much, but it could be things from even the way we start communicating with our spouse, or the added charity that we started giving, or any financial wins that we want to celebrate.
I think the only thing that really jumps out at me is the ability to kind of teach my kids differently than I learned, really. And so giving them a little bit more, at least a little bit more, but hopefully a lot more, just financial literacy and just understanding. Like my daughter turned 18 recently, my oldest daughter. I gave her Rich Dad Poor Dad to read. So that's something that to me was extremely eye-opening. And I know on my podcast, I ask people, right, what's one book that's given you a paradigm shift? And mind you, these are extremely, successful real estate, investors, many of them, worth 7, 8, 9, 10 figures. And invariably, Rich Dad Poor Dad is one of those books that changed people's life. And so I gave it to my daughter. It's just to get that kind of feedback and understand things and see things differently. So for me, that's a big win, because it's about planting seeds. And so we may not even see those wins whatsoever, but to know that we're planting the right seeds and having that emunah and bitachon that we will get to fruition, we will see good things come out of that. That's really a big win for me.
Yeah, I love that answer, because really it brings us back to this point where it's not just about us, right? It's about the legacy and educating our children. If we had a challenge and we're growing from it, that's great. But if we're growing from it and we're changing the next generation, that's like so important, And I see it with my kids as well, the way they've been relating to the way they relate to Meiser, which it just like for them, it's like so habitual. Like it's never going to be a struggle because it's what they do. You know what I mean? From such an early age. I had a daughter who in the 5th grade was learning an economics lesson, and they were talking about the stock market. So she tells her teacher, I'm not a stock investor. I don't buy individual stocks, but I have a portfolio of index funds. She was right, by the way, but she was so confident about it, so calm. Like, I know why that happens. Like why that is, why I have a portfolio. It's so cute. So it's very good. Yonah, I like to wrap up the show with what I call Jewish Money Matter fill in the blanks. And this is a part of the show where I'll give you an open-ended sentence and you'll finish it with the first thing that comes to mind. All right?
Okay. We'll try.
Okay. When I give Meiser or tzedakah, I like to give to
people who ask.
Good. And I want to highlight, because people often ask me about this on the show, about the fact that I always tell people, have a separate Meiser account, right? You want to make it easy on yourself. Just have a separate account where that money's there. And you know what? People ask all the time. The money's there. You won't even struggle, because it's not going to impact whether you're paying your car loan tomorrow or your grocery bill, because the it's there, sitting there, waiting for the person who's asking.
It's so true. And I'll just highlight what I mean by that in a little bit, because oftentimes you don't even know who's struggling. Now it's a whole other level to seek out, and maskil eldel, like the Shlach Kodesh brings down, you have to think about and try to figure out who actually needs it before they come to you. But I had a friend, just a quick example, who I didn't even know, like he got a job running a kollel, and he's this great kollel. It's a friend of mine. I had no idea. I know he was struggling financially, and he got a job like working in fundraising for this colo. And, he came to me. I had no idea. It's a great call. I actually knew other people who were in that. And he was like, oh, can you help support? I was like, sure. Thank you for asking. I had no idea that this was going to help him. It's going to help his job. It's going to help other friends. I didn't even know about it. So again, just if someone asks you, I see that's also, hashgacha pratit, that Hashem is sending this person to you. That's an opportunity.
Right. I'd love to make more money because
I can give more.
Something I wish I'd learned about money growing up is
investing in real estate.
Oh my gosh, yes. I also wish I'd learned more about investing in real estate. Now, I didn't ask you before. Did you invest in your first property before you finished paying all that healthcare debt, or did that come, which came first?
It actually came first, investing first.
Really?
Yeah.
You were bold. Very so interesting. So you had an opportunity and you put whatever money you could into that, and you didn't take care of that debt with that money right away. Correct.
Yeah. I mean, it may have been more financially prudent to try to, take down some high interest, debt, but, the opportunity, it came around and, put a lot of sweat into the property and into that. So that was something that actually turned around quite well. And, I mean, I don't know if I would do it differently now.
You don't know if you would?
No, I don't think I would do it differently.
Interesting. Right. Yeah. It was worth the risk that you took. Good for you. Money, spiritual or physical?
Both.
Something I splurge on unapologetically is
stucco.
Good for you. And a good podcasting mic, maybe,
No, I didn't even splurge. I don't even have anything that I know of that is expensive. Nothing.
You sound like my husband.
I can't even think of something like my Strymel, which is extremely expensive. The same I've had, for almost 20 years. Like,
good investment. So I was going to ask you spender or saver, but I know the answer. Well, it's more like investor, not saver, but both. Right. Okay. Today, I'm most grateful for
health and family.
Nice. Finally, I'm Yonah Weiss, and I believe Jewish money matters because everything matters. Everything matters. Everything in life matters. And money is just a way to get us closer to our purpose in life. Nice. Yonah Weiss, where can we find you?
I am on pretty much all the social medias. Like I mentioned, most active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. But you can also go to yonahweiss.com. I
didn't ask you this, but anything coming up in your career? And what's next? What's happening next? I mean, you're so active. You have your podcast. Any big moves that are coming up?
No big moves per se. Just still doing what I'm doing. It's been going well. Very successful doing it and enjoying it. I have been investing as a limited partner in a lot of deals. And one big thing that will happen shortly is joining a company to do not leaving the cost seg king work, but joining a real estate investment company to do more actively investing. Nice. Yonah Weiss, thank you so much for this insightful interview. I really so appreciate it. And we're going to put everything on the show notes so everybody could find you on LinkedIn and on your website. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And keep up the great work. Such an awesome podcast. Thank you.